Never a good idea to start a show with food in your mouth. Joey, how you doing?
Better than I deserve.
Well, let the people know what we're going to be talking about this first half and introduce our guests or hint at our guests before a formal introduction later.
Yeah. So first of all, I'll talk about the guest that we're gonna have. He's gonna pop in around 7:30. It's Ben Connelly. He's my fellow contributor over at Freeman Newsletter, where he talks about all things American politics. And he's gonna pop in to give us his view of kind of what's going on. Get a nice dose of sanity. And that'll be very interesting and enlightening. But in the meantime, I figured our whole kind of ethos around here is religious liberty. And I found an interesting article by Dr. Robert P. George from Princeton, in defense of religious liberty from a perspective that we don't often think of it. But like we always say, religious liberty is for everybody. And I think it is something that we should highlight. And we should particularly highlight it, I mean, for one, because there's religious liberty implications, but also it's religious liberty implications for a minority of a minority. And so, yeah, that's why I want to bring it up.
Okay, before we talk about the article, why is it important to protect the religious liberty of the minority of the minority? I mean, why not let the mob or the majority rule?
Well, there's a practical answer in that if they can come after, one person's liberty in a different set of circumstances, they can come after another person's core rights, right? It's like that. What's the poem? First, they came for the
Yeah.
trade unionists, but I wasn't a trade unionist, so I didn't say anything. Then they came for all these different people and the Jews and whatnot. And then finally, they came for me. But when they came for me, there was no one left to say anything. So I think that's the practical one. But I think on a more fundamental level, because it's right. Because listen,
B.com. Use
yes,
the code BGBalls to
Hold
save.
on. What?
there are particulars. Um, there are particular right and wrong. Like I think you should follow the Bible, right? So in other words, this group that we're going to talk about, they're not Christian, um, and yet what we see in Scripture consistently is God doesn't want forced worship, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so if this group isn't allowed to worship, I mean, obviously there's limits. If a group is doing something that's harming someone else, but that's not the case here. And so defending a minority's religious right, on top of the practical, is you do it because it's right, because the minorities are made in the image of God, and they have a right to come to these conclusions and to worship either. I mean, I think they should worship the true God, but to worship according to the dictates of their conscience. And also, this is something else I've thought about a lot recently. But I think when you come out in favor of someone else's religious liberty rights, even if you don't agree with it, um, that's a good witnessing tool. Because then
Yep.
you think about it the next day. If you come out and defend someone else, and then when you want to bring up, hey, here's this gospel tract, or here's this,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to be like, oh, that's that person that stuck up for me. Maybe
Yeah,
I'll
stood
listen to what they
up.
have to say. So,
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt that is, and ultimately, you know, you have to find the balance of doing things you want to do for others out of the kindness because it's right, but also with the end goal in mind that everybody should get a fair shot of hearing the gospel of Jesus Christ. So I'm gonna put this article up on the screen, and you tell me what points you want to highlight.
yeah, so the whole good thing. So, like, the gist of it is in Arizona, right, as obviously you guys can see
Mm,
there, right, there's a piece of land. That this piece of land, I believe was it Apache? Yeah, it was an
yeah.
Apache tribe. They've, like, long before America even existed, the Apaches, it's been important for them in their religious ceremony. Um, and yeah, so I believe it was something, I don't believe it was the government, but it
Mm-hmm.
was, I believe, a corporate interest, mining rights, is trying to get mining rights. And so the government's involved, and the government would have to be the ones to stop it. But generally speaking, the US government has seen, in its interest to protect this land. And now apparently there's some deal was made a couple years back that if things aren't changed, this company is going to have the right to just completely destroy this land, and it would permanently alter this group's religious ceremonies, right? Their religious minority rights. And the one thing that the government's standard for intervening in things like this is if the religious liberty right is inherently um, so in other words, there are certain religious things where exceptions can be made, right? And there can be a way to respect the person's religious liberty rights and also this other right. But in this case, if the company destroys this particular piece of land, it will completely alter this group's right to use this land how they've used it for centuries.
I didn't get a chance to read the article. I'm dealing with a cold, but what's the significance of the land to them? Like, what role does it play in the religion?
Yeah, so I don't know the exact specifics of their religious rights. I just know that whatever it is, this piece of land is the only place where they can migrate to it and do whatever the particular rituals are. It would be a different
Okay.
ritual in a different piece of land. Um,
Okay. Okay, I looked
and
something up real quick. It says Oak Flat, known as Chia Chile Bridgeotel in Apache, holds profound religious and cultural significance for the Western Apache and other Native American tribes in Arizona. For centuries, it has been a sacred site for essential ceremonies, including coming of age rituals for Apache girls, and is believed to be inhabited by Gaan, spiritual beings who serve as messengers between the people and the Creator. Definitely not Christianity, but you know, but definitely, if an accommodation could be made to respect their religious liberty, I think one should be made without knowing more details.
yeah, no, I agree with that. And one thing I would say, so the author of this piece is obviously Dr. Robert George. He's a Catholic professor, and he talks a lot about religious liberty issues. I really recommend people check him out because he's actually really good on this. Um, and what I would say is,
All
like
right,
our
hold on, real quick. So it says the controversy surrounding Oak Flat highlights the broader conflict between resource extraction and the preservation of indigenous sacred sites. It raises critical questions about religious liberty, environmental conservation, and the right of Native American communities to protect their cultural and spiritual landmarks. From that little blurb that I just read, go get whatever you got to extract from somewhere else. This can't be the only place in the world. Leave these people alone and let them worship according to the dictates of their conscience. Like I said, without knowing much more.
Yeah. And I guess one of the things I would say, so obviously we talk about it a lot. We're Adventists. And as Adventists, we have a particular focus on religious liberty, and not just religious liberty for ourselves, right? We defend, whether it's Catholics being persecuted or evangelicals or Jews or atheists and secular people, right? We fundamentally believe that as image bearers of God, you have a right to make worship decisions between you and God, or in this case, as you understand the spiritual world. That doesn't mean I defend, the reality of the underlying claims.
Yeah.
I don't. I think Jesus Christ is the only true way. But again, that has to happen through, the correct mechanisms. And I think standing up for someone else. And there's another angle I thought about this on too, is that, listen, I'm not one of those land acknowledgement people or let's apologize for American colonialism. Like,
Yeah.
no, I think it's good that Europeans came to the New World, settled this land, founded America, and I'm proud of that. But also, right, like there was a difference between, say, wars that were fought between Native peoples and settlers. And then it's also a reality that in our history, there were treaties made and treaties violated. And I think that's wrong. And so I think if today we can kind of undo some of that by also standing for the rights of Native peoples, I think that's a good thing. And I will notice President Trump won Native Americans by like 60%. So if somebody in Trump's circle sees this, maybe they could put it on the president-elect's calendar.
Yeah, and I think as you alluded to, our history as a nation has been spotty at best when it comes to holding up to our end of the bargains in some of these treaties and stuff. Um, and so in this modern day and age, I'm pretty sure I'm looking up to see what exactly they're trying to extract. But I'm pretty sure it's not the only place in the world or in the United States where you can get what they're trying to get. So let's try to accommodate them and do what's right. It says resolution copper is what they're looking for. Copper mining beneath Oak Flat. It contains over 1.6 billion tons of ore with a copper concentration of approximately 1.47, making it one of North America's largest undeveloped copper resource. And there you go. It's the almighty dollar over religious liberty. And if we don't protect the religious liberty of these individuals, who's to say they're going to protect the religious liberty of others when the time comes? And to put a plug in for the series I'm doing in Daniel, we see that Daniel chapter 7 that we did last week and Daniel chapter 8 that we're going to do this week, this fourth beast of Daniel chapter 7 is a religious political power that seeks to undermine worship in the true God and seeks to force others to worship against the dictates of their conscience. And so, yeah, stuff like this definitely raises a red flag to look deeper into it and lean towards protecting the religious liberty, even if I don't agree with obviously their religion, because as we've mentioned, Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And when we look at what's been great about America and the Christian character of the country and culture, one of that cornerstones has been our respect for, religious minorities, right? Whether it's going back to our founding father, George Washington, when he he sent a letter to a congregation of Jewish residents of the colonies or early states, and said that in this new nation, the seed of Abraham would always be safe or would always have refuge. Right? That goes right back to our founding. And there's been mistakes made. Right? In the early days of the Republic, there were, well, first of all, before America was a nation, some of the Puritan colonies, right? They fled Europe for their own religious freedom, and then they came and they didn't always grant it to everybody. But ultimately, America moved right, into the First Amendment direction, into that direction that was heavily influenced by Christian thought, right, like Roger Williams and whatnot. But then, even as a nation, right? Listen, I was talking to my buddy who, again, I'm Protestant, very much so, and I have strong disagreements with Catholics. But it's also true that in the early republic, Catholics were often the victims of persecution, right? There was lynchings of Italian Catholics, right, because they weren't trusted, right? There was a whole political party called the Know Nothings, which was basically based on discrimination against Catholic individuals, right, and sowing distrust of Catholic neighbors who had done nothing wrong to you, right? That was wrong. That was immoral. And Catholics, have always been a minority. There's definitely a lot more of them today than there were.
Well, they're a majority now, though.
I don't believe they're a majority. The largest religion in America, I believe, is
Southern one of the largest ones, though.
Yeah. They're not a majority, but they're not, a small percentage anymore.
Yeah, and they also have a lot of influence, right, in politics, Congress, court, and stuff like that. Look, I never have issues with Catholic people. It's their theology. It's as corrupt as can be. The system is, what they teach, obviously, is unbiblical, and they say that themselves. So that's one thing I give them credit for. One of my favorite quotes basically says this: if you want to follow the Bible, this is from a Catholic, mind you, and it says, if you want to follow the Bible and the Bible only, then logically you should become Seventh-day Adventist. Thanks for the shout out.
But I do think that there's an element. Obviously, I agree with you on Catholic theology. Right? If I agreed with Catholic theology, I'd be a Catholic.
Yeah.
But I'm not, and I'm not planning on crossing the Tiber anytime soon. By anytime soon, I mean ever. Um, but one thing that I would say, and this I think goes to our broader point today, here
Hmm.
in a section, is that America's religious freedom culture has allowed for our religious groups to be uniquely better, right? So, in other words, because no side, no church, no establishment has explicit political power, right? We can listen. We can be friends. Like in other words, for a long time, Catholics and Protestants weren't friends. They were going to
Yeah.
war and fighting over countries. And yet in America, I have Catholic friends who I value very much.
Yes.
And also, in many ways, right, Catholics. So, for instance, when it comes to sexual revolution issues, in
Hmm.
like the 70s and 80s, Protestants didn't get some of these issues because some of the technologies and things were a little novel, and dealing with the political issue and whatnot was a little novel. Protestants, we didn't know, oh, what should we do about abortion, or what should we do about birth, some of these different things. And the Catholic Church, and I think Catholics in America were able to influence in this section in a good way,
Hmm.
right, towards a more balanced view on, say, sexual ethics. And I think also, like when I look at the Acton Institute, which is it's a Catholic think tank here in Michigan, and they're very much free market oriented, very much
Hmm.
religious liberty aimed in ways I don't think a Catholic organization in 1255 would be. But
Nope.
there's a distinct, right, American religious liberty flavor, and that's something when we are making religious liberty cases in prophecy, I think we should appeal to the good that Catholics in America have done. That doesn't mean we downplay our differences, but it shows how America's democracy was able to sand down the rough edges of some of our religious groups and then also bring out the best aspects.
Yeah.
Obviously, we know that there's coming a time, right, in the final crisis
Hmm.
where we will lose religious liberty. But to quote a writer from our denomination that we both love,
Hmm.
it's when America betrays every principle of her
Hmm.
Constitution and Declaration that is the case. So when we see Catholics defending our Constitution, we'll stand right there with them. Right? When we
Yeah.
see them defending religious liberty, we'll stand right there with them. We'll still try to argue about theology and win them over on those things. But I think that's good to remember that there's something about the American character worth defending.
When we have this religious liberty, and basically what you were saying, when we have this religious liberty, it forces us to self-examine and thereby um, live a cordial life with one another, right? When one religion dominates, they tend to get lazy, and then think they're high and mighty, like we saw unfortunately in the Dark Ages. And so it's good to have the religious liberty, and religious liberty actually starts in heaven, right? That's why God didn't destroy Satan or Lucifer right away. Once again, though, to make the distinction that I clearly like to make is I have issues with the theology, not the people. And one of the beautiful promises of Scripture is found in Revelation 18:4. It says, "Come out of her, my people." And God identifies people who are in the world or people who are in other faiths that aren't Christ-centered. He calls them my people and invites them to come. And if you look further in that verse, it says, "Come out of her so you don't receive of her plagues." In other words, God wants everybody to avoid the judgment. And so it's not like come out of her, you evildoers. It's come out of her, my people. Because he knows there are people who are only in other religions, not just Catholicism, but like this Indian tribe, who are following God according to the dictates of their own conscience. And when presented with greater light, they will make the decision to follow Jesus wherever he leads. And so that's why we have to preserve religious liberty for everybody, because in the end, only persuasion The love of God should win out, not force.
And I think what C.S. Lewis says about the Tao and the abolition of man, right? When we when we defend other people's religious liberty rights, even when we disagree with them, that makes it easier. Like when we're trying to make arguments about what kind of laws we should have for a moral and just
Yeah.
society, right? When everybody at the table knows that we're all committed to each other's religious liberty rights, it makes those other conversations less we win,
Stressful.
you lose. So in
Yeah.
other words, when we make an argument on, say transgenderism and why, we think we need to curb the excesses or in a more serious way, the results of this movement, right? And we might need some just laws to do that. Like everybody at the table knows, yes, we may be arguing for a position that's in line with Christian morality because it's right and just, but we're not doing it because we want to enforce Christianity on anyone, but because we want to live in a just society based on, these Tao, natural law, Romans 1 principles.
Yeah. I remember many years ago that this is a little off topic, but I think I can bring it in. Many years ago, when I first heard of this distinction between sex and gender, right? Because for many years, basically used the same way, interchangeable. And that was how maybe pre-pandemic I started hearing that. And then the pandemic just like ratcheted it up. And now I think the tide is turning to where people are foregoing that. Even AOC took off her pronouns from her bio. But it shows you how sticking to the scriptures and sticking to liberty of conscience is so important, because we saw, especially during COVID, how negative it got, how much people wanted to control the conscience of others. And that is always a dangerous step to go. And so, yeah, that other liberals, I saw this. I want to show you this real quick. Man, I got a cold. It's annoying. Oh, yeah, here it is. This girl.
I think that this is a small but incredibly loud and influential faction of the Democratic Party. This is not indicative of all Democrats. This is not indicative of all Democratic lawmakers. This is a small group of activists who like to bully, who like to go to city council meetings, who like to go to various rallies and essentially be loud, be threatening, be aggressive until they get their way. And for far too long, the Democratic Party has been terrified of these little mobs of people, these little mobs of activists, and have basically just carried out what these activists want. And I just think that they need to be a little smarter than falling prey to the whims of various activist groups, because they are not representative of the majority of Americans. The majority of Americans, especially in a state like California, want homeless people to be housed, but they also understand that this issue is far more complicated than the housing first policy of throwing anyone who doesn't have a home into an apartment, right? Because the fact of the matter is we have severe mental.
Well, the point she was making there, right, that we can't let a little minority group, dictate, and it taints everybody. And that's the issue too with religious liberty. When you start diminishing people's rights, then you begin to get ruled by the mob or a small minority, and that never ends well, because as she was alluding to, it's destroying an entire party. And we should want both parties to have a voice and let persuasion win out in the ballot box.
Yeah, so that was Anna Kasparian from the Young Turks.
Yeah.
And for anybody who's not familiar with her, I've been watching Young Turks. Young Turks is my go-to progressive show to be like, what are the progressives saying right now?
Yeah.
And Anna Kasparian is not like a center-left person. She's left-wing. She's left-wing, very much left-wing in economics, on social issues. And yet, in recent years, she's been kind of having this awakening where she's seen the excesses of wokeism. And to his credit, listen, everyone knows, and I have my issues with President Trump, but I do think in this election, wokeism was what was defeated. But what I will counsel and I will plead with Republicans on is defeating wokeism is defeating, right, this negative vision of the left, right? But if you do that and you don't have a substantive, better vision, and now wokeism is dead and the left recognizes it, the right is going to be vulnerable to a non-woke left, right? In other words,
Yeah.
if they spend all this time defeating this monster, and then next time around, that's not the version of the left, right? They decide to go with a more Josh Shapiro, kind of normie, somewhat populist left-winger, who's not in all this crazy stuff. If the right doesn't have a substantive vision of, and I think what that vision should be the American founding. I think that every period of renewal in American life has always been going back to that, right? To the idea, as Abraham Lincoln kind of was really the first guy to tie it together in this explicit way, of the fact that the Constitution, right, that's the law of the land. The Declaration is kind of the ethos, and you got to tie those two things together. And I think if the right embraces that, I think that's a winning message. I do think if all it is populism, that, like, if the left embraces its own populism and eschews wokeism, the right is going to struggle. And so we've got to have that substantive vision. So that was just kind of my thoughts.
No
When
doubt. I mean, even the
lot of
Bible talks.
left-wingers- So
Even the
a
Bible-
lot of left-wingers after the election have been saying things like that. So.
Yeah, no, even the Bible talks about that if you cast out a demon from a person, but don't fill it with obviously Jesus Christ, then more nuttiness comes in. I'm looking for another video. Let's see if this is the one.
You need to give me one promise.
Go on.
You have to give me one promise that you guys aren't going to do me dirty in the thumbnail for this video. You promise?
You know what? I can't promise, because we've done some corkers recently, particularly involving Cenk. But as he knows better than anybody, a great thumbnail drives more traffic.
Yeah, that wasn't the one. Sorry. There's this one where she really goes off on the Democratic Party, and that she's basically says she's basically done with them. Not that she's going to become Republican, but that their ideology is not conducive to normal people.
Yeah.
Man, my allergies, my sickness, my cold is really bugging me.
It's one thing that in America's past, often a defeat for a party has often been a good chance for regrouping. So, for instance, in the 70s, right, with the kind of abysmal record of the Carter administration, obviously Reagan, one of my favorite presidents, he swept to power, right? The Reagan Revolution swept Democrats out of power, and they really were out of power until 92. And listen, I have many disagreements with him, but a young, much more moderate Arkansas governor, right, was able to come back in Bill Clinton and give Democrats a new breath of life. I have my problems with Bill Clinton, right, morally, policy-wise, but in other words, it very much was a victory after years in the desert. And so if Democrats wake up from this woke, if they take the right lessons, right, that's gonna be to their advantage. I still won't be one, because I think even outside of the wokeism, I think the left-wing kind of progressive policy is bad, and I'm opposed to it. But, to all the people I see, and this is one reaction I saw to the election by some, Republicans and Trump supporters, is we want everything, right? Like, we can do whatever we want, and we're never going to lose another election. I'm like, you're going to lose another election, right? If Jesus doesn't come first, you're going to lose another election. That's the way democratic politics works. So be smart and govern well. And I think Trump has a mandate to be normal. If he's normal, he does normal things. doesn't kill us with tariffs, and he lowers taxes, and he lowers burdensome regulation, and the economy does well, and he's able to make it so people feel secure, right, globally. If he does those, you know, Republicans may do all right in 2028. But if he goes kind of the Matt Gaetz route, right, and he goes the kind of more crazier route, right, Republicans might be in for some hurt in 2026 and 2028.
And here's our guest tonight, Ben. How you doing today?
Hi guys, I'm doing well. How are you?
I got a cold and sickness, but we didn't want to cancel on you again. But hey, the show must go on, they say. Joey, introduce our guest and dive us into our topic.
Yeah, this is Ben Connelly. He's a fellow contributor over at the Freeman newsletter. And I believe you're also a personal trainer, right?
I am, yeah.
Nice. So yeah, I wanted to have Ben on. I think he's got interesting things to say in his punditry column, and we live in interesting times politically. So I figure it'd be nice to have a conversation that maybe offers a dose of sanity to an insane world.
Thank you for having me.
So Joey, ask the first question.
Yeah. So I guess starting out, before we get into kind of some domestic policy punditry, I guess the big thing in the news is everything going on in Syria. I was wondering, do you have any thoughts on kind of that foreign policy landscape? What do you think that means for the upcoming Trump administration?
Sure. So it's shocking turn of events. Nobody would have predicted 2 or 3 weeks ago, including Middle East experts 2 or 3 weeks ago would never have said Bashar al-Assad is about to go. I was in high school when the war started, and so it's a bit eerie to realize, wow, we live in a new world today than we did for so long. This conflict's finally been resolved. It's difficult to say whether the rebels will be friendlier to the United States. Certainly, it seems they probably won't. Assad was certainly a bad guy, certainly an evil man, and so it's always good to see him gone. And there's a chance that the rebels, I'm sure that they will the new Syrian regime. I'm sure the new Syrian regime will, under Jelani, will commit human rights violations, but probably not on the scale that Assad did. Assad was in a league of his own, or at least up there with Saddam and a handful of others. And it's possible that there's going to be a opportunity for the United States to in the region, but it's also popular that they will turn their attention now against American positions and the Kurds. So it's hard to say. It's possible too. They're a Sunni organization, but it's certainly possible they'll continue to support Hezbollah the way that Assad did against Israel. We've seen other examples in the region of Sunnis and Shiites who supposedly have mortal differences between each other, uniting against American and Israeli interests.
Russia supposedly was kind of backing them and arming them. What does it say about Russia that they couldn't hold off this insurgency, in your mind?
I think it speaks to the fact that they're stretched thin by the war in Ukraine. Also, it seems that they didn't want to commit as much firepower as it would have taken. Certainly, if Russia had been fully behind and said whatever it takes to stop the advance, we're going to do it, they would have. But they lost patience. Their priority is the war in Ukraine, not Syria, and if Assad wasn't going to be able to hold off the rebels, Russia was not going to vastly ramp up its armaments and send forces into Syria to protect him.
Yeah. Go ahead, Joey.
Yeah, so I agree. I agree with that. I think that's a good take. I always say when I think of the situation in Syria, it's like what Henry Kissinger said about the Iran-Iraq war, right? I wish everybody could lose. I mean, obviously the SDF and the Kurds, obviously I wish them well, but they're a minority. But the one thing that and American policy doesn't do this enough, and there's obviously it's a political football whenever immigrants are mentioned. But I do wish there was more we could do, whether it was even refugee camps in the area. I know some of the Christian populations in Syria are some of the oldest in the world, and I know, like I said, I'm glad Assad's gone, but I also know that these Islamic groups, they're not exactly friendly to Christian populations when they come to power. So I'm just praying for our brothers and sisters in the Syrian church, and yeah, it's going to be might be a rough time, but hopefully things sort themselves out.
I want to turn it a little to domestic here. Your thoughts on the Neely trial, where this young man, I'm drawing a blank, who got acquitted, and also the CEO case, and finding out that it was a radicalized left Italian young man who is a suspect of the killing of the CEO.
So first, I'm very glad that Daniel Penny was acquitted. It would have been a serious problem if he'd been convicted. Here was a man who acted in self-defense, and you can argue that he went too far, but the Neely, who who was killed. He was himself violent. There were previous instances in which he was violent. He was saying he was going to kill people on the train.
Yeah.
He looked like he was going to kill people on the train. And here's a man who acts in self-defense and in protection of all the other passengers on the train. And the idea that he is the culprit, and that the violent man who was stopped, Neely, is the victim, is crazy, and really goes to show there was a great post on Substack on notes recently by a guy named Max. I forget his last name, but he was saying that this is the perfect example of the inversion that left wing, I don't know if you'd call it egalitarian, or victimology.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that basically the good guy is the bad guy and the bad guy is the good guy.
Yeah.
What really matters is power dynamics. The fact that Penny was white and Neely was black, and the fact that ultimately the guy who came out on top, well, that shows that he's more powerful. There does seem to be some sort of sick idea that success, or both in business or in war or in anything else, is a sign of lack of virtue and failure. In this case, Neely being social outcast, being pretty much on the fringes, on the margins of society, that makes him more virtuous, and that even though he's a violent criminal, he's the real hero, he's a martyr, and all of that. So I'm glad that Penny got off. And then that a similar sort of inversion is at work with the fact that some are celebrating, the killing of Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare. There is a, and it was lucky that finally finally he was apprehended. The killer was apprehended. There's a hashtag trending right now on Twitter, free him, and some of them want this man Mangione freed because supposedly he's a vigilante. He's a hero for striking a blow against corporate greed, which I think is disgusting. I think
Yeah.
whether or not you agree with decisions that United Healthcare made, murdering the CEO in cold blood is evil.
Yeah, no
So
doubt. No doubt. There is go ahead, Joey.
yeah, I was just going to say, so like that whole situation makes me think of the verse in Matthew 24 talking about the end times. It says, because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. And like, I don't know how you can see, a father of, I think, two murdered, broad daylight, right? He didn't commit any crimes. Right? And the fact that our culture like looks at that and like, oh, whatever, rich pig or capitalist scum. I'm like, I don't think that pretends good things to our culture. That's the reaction of. Oh, I'm not going to say it's the majority of people. I don't think, but a large vocal minority that feels comfortable saying stuff like that.
Well, even if it's not a large minority, it's very well seen because you see clips trending of this one I saw of a young lady who thinks that the killer is hot and that more assassinations will tell the CEOs of this world to buckle up and be more kind and compassionate. Regardless, it's wrong. And people who celebrate it, there's something wrong with you.
Agreed.
So kind of jumping gears here. Obviously, we're still in a transition period after the last election. President-elect Trump. Obviously, I know we share
Hey,
reservations.
Joey, real quick, before we do that, let me show this clip. Before we leave that, let me get in there. Hold on, let me put our guest on this screen here. And
how can this make you joyful? This guy.
I do believe in the sanctity of life. And I think that's why I felt, along with so many other Americans, joy, unfortunately, because it feels like.
Serious?
I mean,
joy at a man's execution?
Maybe not joy, but certainly not empathy. Because again,
we're watching the footage. How can this make you joyful? This guy's a husband, he's a father, and he's being gunned down in the middle of Manhattan. Why does that make you joyful?
Of Americans that he murdered. So are the tens of thousands of Americans, innocent Americans, who died because greedy health insurance executives like this one push policies of denying care to the most vulnerable people. And the many millions of Americans that have watched people that I care about suffer and in some cases die because of lack of health care.
So should they all be killed then? Should they all be killed, these healthcare executives? Would that make you even more joyful?
No, that would not.
But why not?
And,
why are you laughing?
I think because it wouldn't fix the system.
You seem to find the whole thing hilarious.
let's leave it there. Your thoughts on that? Yeah, it is.
Oh.
Let me get Ben's thoughts first. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, that was Taylor Lawrence talking. So we do. It's hard to take her seriously. I don't know what's going on in her life, but she's known. She has a reputation, even among left-wing journalists on Twitter who have meltdowns. She is known for being truly crazy and having utterly strange reactions to all kinds of things, utterly disproportionate. She tried to get, her colleague, at least one colleague at the Washington Post, fired. She was fired herself. She was, a year ago, she was a big part of she was a smaller part, but she was a part of the campaign to, cancel Substack over supposedly having, white nationalists. And she's out there. She's not representative of a, big demographic.
Go ahead,
thankfully.
Joey.
Yeah, so back to the transition question. Obviously, I know we share skepticisms and reservations with populism with President-elect Trump, but he did win. He won fair and square. I'm grateful that Kamala Harris lost, very much so. But I guess I would say maybe start with well, let's start with the concerns. What would you say concerns you most about the transition team that we're seeing, right? The cabinet that's forming, and then where would you say you're the most hopeful of that the next 4 years, I think will probably be better than the last. I think that's not a big bar, but I definitely think that'll be the case. So kind of your skepticism, yeah, your concerns, and then also where you think the administration will be better.
So I'm most worried about Tulsi Gabbard. We were talking about Syria earlier. She famously was pals with Bashar al-Assad. She went to Syria and she, said that Assad was doing more because he was fighting these Islamist rebels, that he was doing more against America's enemies than we were, and we were supporting our own enemies. And certainly Jelani and the Islamists are bad news. Jelani was in Al Qaeda. This is they sprung right out of Al Qaeda, but she has been parroting Russian propaganda and Syrian propaganda and basically just general anti-Americanism for a long time. She's in my mind, she could be truly dangerous in the role of director of national intelligence. I would not put it past her to pass secrets to some of our enemies. And generally, the DNI is not as important a position as, say, Secretary of Defense, but she still will be privy to important secrets, and I think she could do a lot of harm. Similarly, RFK Jr., I think I'm a little less worried about him at Health and Human Services, but still, I find it very concerning. I think he's a quack, and I don't know that he believes things he says. And unfortunately, though, a lot of people do believe that stuff. A lot of people believe, and not because sure, there are some things that he says that are true, but then he takes it too far, or So certainly, I agree with the idea that eating healthier and exercising, and maybe we need to be taking fewer medications. But then he takes the whole healthy living thing to a real crazy place. And I'm also concerned. I don't know that he will be doing a whole lot to set abortion policy, but he is a committed pro-choicer through birth, supposedly, according to
Mercy.
one interview he gave. And while he may not make any changes, what he may do is, Trump is probably not going to have his eye on the ball. He probably won't reverse any of what the current Biden-Harris administration is doing through HHS to, further abortions and sort of thwart pro-life cause. So he could do some damage there, and on vaccines and a few other things.
Bef- Before you go on to the potential positives, just I don't want to say pushback, but just to clarify, what about someone who would say that with Tulsi and with RFK, that these positions aren't in the sense, lone rangers, that they will have a team that will help balance them out? What would you say to that? Or potentially help balance them out?
So I agree with that. One thing I would say, though, is that and this point is certainly not original to me. Yuval Levin and other people have made it. You really do need someone with some sort of management experience in these positions if you want to go in and make change in an organization. You don't just want to be a loose cannon. And so hopefully they will have good people around them who know what they're doing. But even just having someone who doesn't know what they're doing at all at the top means that it's going to take longer to do things. It's going to be harder to implement changes. They're just going to need to spend time learning how to get things done, whatever it is that they want done, whatever change they want made. They won't know any of the bureaucratic procedures to go through, and there's an argument to be made that the bureaucracy could be a lot smaller and a lot simpler, and I agree with that. But if that's your goal, you need to have people who understand how the system currently works in order to successfully reform it in that direction.
Okay, makes sense. Good.
It's like keeping to know what to cut, you have to know what's necessary, right? So you're not just throwing everything out like, whoo, then maybe we needed that. Before I want
Right,
to
I mean,
get the rest of your,
No, go
I
ahead.
want to get the rest of your answer, but just on the RFK thing, I guess I resonate with your concerns, and like I agree with him that there are things in our food that probably shouldn't be, and like but the problem is I think RFK's instincts as a Kennedy and as a Democrat are very much in the over-regulation phase, the kind of the nanny state thing, where it's not merely like, okay, we're going to pass a single regulation to say, on some of these red dyes and stuff that are legitimately not good for you. Okay, maybe one regulation here, but if that's the entire approach, I think, I don't know. I just think there's a track record there, and again, Kennedy, right? I want to emphasize he's a Kennedy. And then the other thing is on some of it, right? And this goes to the nanny state thing, right? Where I could list a specific problem that he talks about all the time. And like as a free market guy, I'm like, oh, wait, I know how this problem happened. The high fructose corn syrup. It's true. We have way too much of it in our stuff. But the reason why is because what his guy loves, the T word, foreign sugar is heavily tariffed, and domestic corn is highly subsidized. So maybe if you want to replace real sugar, you want real sugar instead of corn syrup, maybe talk to your boss about lessening up on tariffs and maybe get rid of some of these domestic subsidies, and the market could correct for that. Because guess what? I've been to Mexico. The Coke does indeed taste better. Right? So, but yeah. But
Which
anyway,
Coke? Just kidding. Ben, your thoughts on what Joey just said?
I agree completely, and I was going to say that if I was going to list a third thing that I'm concerned with, is that this time Trump really is going to go all in on the tariffs. I think he's an old man, and he's been talking about tariffs since the 1980s, and he got to do a little bit of it last time, but I think this time he really is. He wants. He's excited to get in there and raise tariffs on all kinds of things, and I think that's going to be bad. But the silver lining is that it may be that we have to learn the hard way on the subject of tariffs. Americans learned the hard way during the 1970s that price controls don't work, and it certainly, Milton Friedman and others were writing about it for years, and then Milton Friedman went and told Nixon, explained to him what it was going to do, and Nixon knew that the price controls weren't going to work, and were going to have a terrible effect and cause shortages, and he did them anyway because they were popular. And after the destruction that they caused, they weren't popular anymore for about a generation. So we'll see what happens on the tariffs.
What do you think about the people who say he's just using it as a negotiation ploy, like a card in the deck that he's not afraid to use, but ultimately really doesn't want to use them?
If that's true, that would be a good thing. And if what we got out of this were some better free trade deals, that would be good.
Okay, cool. And what do you think will be some of the positives?
China, not Japan.
Yeah. Potential positives of this administration.
Potential positives. So certainly, an end to a number of Biden administration policies on, the border, on trans issues, on just general wokeness throughout the bureaucracy, in education. An end to, run around student loan schemes to try to, pick the pocket of working class Americans to pay for, people's grad degrees. So right there, those are some positives. I think Trump is, he's certainly not Ronald Reagan on the subject of defense, but I think he will probably do more to rebuild our military than Biden was doing. And it's very necessary, I think, to increase defense spending. Um, and it will probably go up at least a little bit. The Navy has had a goal of getting to over 300 ships for years, and they raised it to 355, and then they talked about 400 or 450 or 500, and yet they still have been in the 290s, and under the Biden administration, they went down into, I believe, the high 280s. And by law, we're supposed to have 11 aircraft carriers, and we haven't had 11 aircraft carriers for probably, I don't know, 40 years, 50 maybe, no, probably 40. And, perhaps during our lifetimes, we will either, we'll reach that number, but that could be a long way off. So that's one area. Another area that the Trump administration could be better. Another one that I'm very optimistic about is energy and interior. I think the
Yes.
the
Drill,
two
baby, drill.
Yes, exactly, exactly. I like Burgum at interior, especially in light of I am blanking on the name of the case, but there's a case that's going to go in front of the Supreme Court. The state of Utah is suing over the fact that the federal government just owns vast swaths of land in some of these western states. In Utah, I think the figure was like 70 or 80% of Utah's land is just owned by the government, and they aren't doing anything on it. This isn't the national parks, and it's not military bases, and these states want their land back. And I think that that certainly under Burgum, and definitely if the Supreme Court rules in Utah's favor, we could see some major changes out there, including more opportunities for energy, more opportunities for really whatever the states want to do, building infrastructure, building even new cities. I mean, we could have whole new cities in some of these states, Nevada, Utah. So that would be good. And yes, exactly. Moving forward with an all of the above energy policy. I'm big on nuclear too. But it sounds like the new energy secretary, whose name escapes me at the moment, he's an all of the above guy. He says he likes all forms of energy, so that's a positive.
And
Let me
he,
ask you a question. I'm curious about and get your opinion. What do you think Doge will actually accomplish? And you think they can accomplish as much as they're talking? They're set to expire on July 5th, 2026. Your thoughts on them?
Unfortunately, I don't think that they will accomplish nearly as much as some people seem to think they will. I would love to see the federal government cut down and the federal budget cut by a lot, but that's going to require more than just eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse. It is going to require hard choices because you can't do more with less. You have to do less. And we have to make choices about if the government is going to be dramatically smaller than it is today, what is the government going to stop doing? And whether that's the federal government passing certain priorities back to states and local governments, or in some cases, not doing anything at all. I would be in favor of, eliminate the Department of Veterans Affairs and instead, give veterans vouchers to buy health insurance and health care in the private marketplace,
Yeah.
they would get better care than under the VA. But Musk and Ramaswamy will be sitting outside of the government making recommendations. Congress will have to, any major changes Congress would have to make. Fixing Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid are off the table, in which case, um, without cutting defense spending, you essentially are extremely,
Limited,
it's
yeah.
impossible. Mathematically, it would be impossible to start paying down the national debt without touching Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. So at the same time, I hope they're able to do some good. Elon Musk has been doubted at every stage of his career, and he is a little bit crazy at times. But I've doubted him before in terms of SpaceX and Tesla, certainly Tesla especially, and he proved me wrong. And Twitter too. Everyone was saying. And I was going to wreck it, but it's fine. And Tesla and SpaceX have gone from jokes to remarkably successful companies that really moved us into the future. I mean, the idea of a fully electric car, even 10 years ago, people were saying, it's not going to happen. And certainly 20 years ago, the idea of reusable rockets owned
Yeah.
by a private company, that was science fiction 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's the one
One
that.
thing that it bothers me to no end. Listen, I don't like some of the things that he's said in recent years, conspiracy wise and stuff. But all the people who have just decided because he's MAGA now or because he likes Trump, we're going to make him enemy number one. I'm like, I can't do it.
Yeah.
The man is sending human civilization to space. All right. That alone makes me a super fan of Elon Musk. I think it's awesome. And it's one of those things that like a part of me gets like sad and like depressed inside when like I'd turn to a kid like and be like, hey, did you hear about what happened with the now I forget what it is, the booster, right? That re-landed and their eyes don't light up. There's a couple kids who still have that spark, and I'm like, but so many kids, it's just like, oh, who cares? There's so many people. Like, I read the stories in 19, I forget what the year was, but the moon landing in the 60s, and like Americans crowded around, right, the TV, and like they were like bated breath listening for Neil Armstrong's words. And today people are like, whatever, right? Like we're restarting a space race. Who cares? I'm like, I can't get on board with that. I'm pro Elon Musk, no matter how many crazy, stupid things he says that I don't like. I'm still a fan.
Well, a lot of these geniuses, I mean, they probably have 1,000 missteps before they hit on what makes them popular, right? So he throws ideas out there, and that's part of the genius, right? What sticks, sticks. And you got Tesla, you got SpaceX, you got Twitter. I think in one way, Twitter saved the election. I mean, the free speech that you have there on X now compared to the way it was back before he bought it. So who knows how history is going to judge that move? You know what I'm saying? Like 10 years, 15 years from now. But I think it was a net positive.
Yeah, I certainly think. I think that Twitter, I like it better or as much. There are things that I like better about it now. I don't honestly use it enough to notice too many differences. Although it is noticeably less woke,
Yeah.
that's a positive. But at the same time, I don't know how much of an outsized impact it had on the election because still the number of users on Twitter is very small compared to the U.S. population, and a lot of average Americans, a lot of swing voters, they're not on Twitter, and they don't necessarily know what um, Elon Musk is doing or what Taylor Lawrence is tweeting or that they don't know who that is.
Hmm.
And so yeah, but it's been interesting to watch Elon Musk's. He is a strange guy. But 2011, the U.S. space shuttle program ended. That was the same year the Syrian civil war started, and I remember being, um, really sad that this was the closing of an era. The U.S. space shuttle was ending, and we were going to have to rely on the Russians um, to get into space. And at the time, there was no prospect for American space flight, really. And sure, there was this guy, Elon, and he had this company, SpaceX, but nobody really thought that in the near future, anything was going to come of that. And turn around 13 years later, and it looks like the future of space flight is private companies like SpaceX using technology which is a radical improvement over what we had 20 years ago.
Yeah, and I think that's shout out to capitalism. When you get the government, you know what? I just saw it recently because you guys are Reagan fans. The 9 worst words were from the government, and we're here to help. Go ahead, Joey.
So I was just gonna say, I hope it wasn't just like a one-off campaign line, but in the campaign, there was a lot of things Trump said I didn't like, but one thing that I loved was his, if I'm elected, we're gonna put a man on Mars in 4 years. Now, I don't think 4 years is a realistic timescale, but I like the vision, and I do hope. I honestly was hoping this was kind of like my thought before they'd announced Doge or that. I was honestly hoping he was going to announce that he's putting Elon Musk in charge of NASA and was going to allow SpaceX to rehab NASA. But I do hope he kind of obviously it was a good campaign line, but listen, JFK is the one who set the vision for we're going to have a man on the moon within the decade. So if President Trump can set that vision, right, I won't say I won't put the MAGA hat back on, but I will applaud and I will stand up and applaud the president for that.
As we wrap up here, I got to put kids to bed. Any final thoughts in the next 100 days? What would you like to see the president do, once he starts in those first critical 100 days?
So I hope that he gets off to the ground running and doesn't have his first 100 days mired in scandals and, sideshows about whether it's his own scandals or whether it's various nominees. We already seem to have some of that going on. I hope that, in energy policy that we get off to the ground running. The military, I think, I would love to see some recognition that we have to move fast. If 4 years is a short time, and every year the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization, gets passed way too late. The budget gets passed way too late. We get these continuing resolutions, and so for military readiness, I think we need to have I think he needs to hit the ground running, and whether or not it's Hegseth at defense, if he wants to make changes along the lines of reorienting the department around its central mission of defense and eliminating wokeness and other extraneous, sideshows. That needs to start right away, because the Pentagon is the biggest bureaucracy in the world, and reforming it is hard and takes a lot of work. So that will be, and I hope they get off to the ground cutting regulations too. The reason the economy picked up during under the Obama administration, we had anemic growth, and people were saying that. I remember people saying, maybe it's just impossible for countries to have more than 1% growth. Maybe developed countries have just hit their limit of growth. And then Trump got in, and, it certainly wasn't only him and only his administration, but he did cut some regulations, which help the economy finally really recover from the financial collapse in 2008, 2009, 2007, 2008. So I hope he cuts regulations and the economy picks up. And I hope we don't get another bout of inflation, but I'm worried we might.
And my last question has to do with the border. Uh, don't put on your policy hat, but put on from the eyes of the public. What do you think they want to see done?
Absolutely. The public wants to have a controlled border. That's the number one thing. They don't want to feel like they're living in a country that has no control over what's going on the border, and there's chaos and there's people coming over. And it's, whether you're in favor of more immigration or fewer immigrants coming in, the number one thing, and Americans, a super majority of Americans wants controlled border. They want it to be an orderly process for people coming in, and they don't want small towns and cities near the border to be flooded with, migrants who, whether you're in favor of more immigration or not, a town can't take a doubling of its own size in overnight or in the period of months. So there needs to be, and whether it's a wall, whether it's e-verify, whether it's some combination of other security policies, they need to be serious on this. Essentially, my entire life, immigration has been a serious issue. People have been worried about the border, and it's only gotten worse in the last 10 years, and really under the Biden administration, it got a lot worse. So that also within the first 100 days, meaningful progress on securing the border.
Okay. Joey, any closing thoughts from you before we let our guests go?
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is just the last thing for me. We kind of hinted at, but before you were on in our discussion, we showed Anna Kasparian kind of waking up, right, to the excesses of the woke left. There's, I know Cenk Uyghur, even, again, very far left, been waking up to some of that. And other people on the left have been saying things. I know John Fetterman, others. And I don't know if you would agree with this thesis, but I kind of think wokeness has reached its peak in this election and was defeated. And if the Republican Party, in other words, is not facing a woke opponent, I'll still disagree with them because I still think they're going to be progressive and big government and leftist. But if they're not woke, what is the vision, like the underlying vision that you would recommend for Republicans to actually give the American people something to vote for, right, as far as a vision in 2028 to compete against an enemy that will not be as easy to defeat as the caricatured woke left?
So I thought we hit peak woke in 2021 or 2022, and then I think in 2023 it got worse again. So I won't hold my breath, but I follow Roy Teixeira, who has been screaming at the Democratic Party for years now to ditch the wokeness stuff that this has severely hurt their brand. If they followed Roy's advice, the Democratic Party could be either party right now could be a majority party, and the other party could be a minority party that we won't have these back and forth elections. And if the Democratic Party were to ditch the wokeness stuff, they would move and move more towards some economic populism, some economic, just more common sense. They could be a serious governing party for decades. And as much as I'd be glad to see wokeness go, I don't want the Democrats to be in power for decades, because they will move the country further to the left. And for the Republicans to counter that, I think they need to offer a compelling vision of an American future that is inclusive of all Americans. And I say that not in the way the left means inclusive, but in a way that I think the Republicans have a real shot at, which is the left likes to treat people as members of identity groups. You know, when Harris decided she had a problem with white men, she did straight white dudes for Harris. And the Republicans have a chance to say, no, we're all Americans. And that's our identity. That's something we share. And certainly, being, Reaganite conservative, I would prefer to see the Republicans continue to, champion free markets and small government and individual liberty and a strong national defense. But at the very least, what the Republican Party has to offer is a positive vision of America is a good place. We could acknowledge that we have, as every other country has, done sinful things in the past, but America is a good country and a great country, and we should be proud of that country, and we should be proud to be Americans. If Republicans don't turn their backs on that message, I think a majority of Americans, a super majority of Americans, want to love their country. They want to live in a good country. And so that's a very popular, message.
All right. Ben, thank you very much. And Joey, once again, thank you. Until next time on the Gio and Joey Show, be blessed.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.